I hoped that this evening I would be in Minneapolis and that I would be with 600 of my colleagues from across the country who were gathering yesterday for a day of learning and reflection, of touring the city and hearing from impacted peoples and communities, and who today were out in the street, some at the airport, some in the suburbs, some at the Target Center. I think there's a high of -12 in Minneapolis today. Hundreds of clergy from around the country gathered. The reason I'm not there is by the time I had seen the link about what was happening, and I talked to Gavi a lot and talked to Jess and our co-presidents. By the time I filled out the form, they were full. And I, along with many of my colleagues, were added to the wait list because there was more people wanted to be there than they could reasonably accommodate, that they could provide the training and the resources and the support to give us enough to know to come back to share and to help keep us safe during that experience. I didn't want to be here tonight. I wanted to be in Minneapolis with 12 pairs of pants on. And instead, I followed my colleagues and friends on Instagram and Facebook, read newspaper articles about 100 clergy who were arrested in protest, saw their testimonies and stories of what they had witnessed and what they had learned and what they're coming back to share with their communities about. I texted my friends who live in Minneapolis. One lives in St. Paul, but I'm told that it's very close to, I've never been to Minnesota before. They're ready for me to crash on their couch, ready for me to be stuck there for an extra day or an extra 5. They warned me about the temperature, but were grateful that I was even thinking about coming. They live in the burbs, and they too are feeling this fear and tension. I saw from colleagues who live in Minnesota who put out the call, Reform rabbis and cantors, asking us to come, asking us to open eyes and bear witness to what they're seeing and experiencing on their streets, in their cities, and in their towns. I wanted to be there in part because, as I shared with you last week, last Wednesday, I studied with my 10th grade students a letter written by Eugene Borowitz of blessed memory, whose yahrzeit is tonight. We studied his letter, Why We Went, about how he and 16 colleagues were in St. Augustine to integrate lunch counters and were arrested. I felt that obligation, not just because I wanted to go and feel like I was a part of something, because it felt like rabbinic obligation to go and be present, to see with eyes, to stand together, and then to come back and share. So it's not just what we see on Instagram and Facebook, and if the news chooses to share the story or not, but to tell you what I saw and experienced. I told my friends, I told colleagues, I pray with my whole heart that we do not need to go back, but the next time I see the link, I will register faster before asking anyone's permission. I also wanted to be there because of my family history. I shared this, I think, about a year ago. And one of the challenges of not writing your sermons down is you can't search your files for what you said when. Some of you know that I'm the descendant of Holocaust survivors. My grandfather, Pierre Fenster, who, for those who know him, is second cousins with Bert Wohl, a longtime member of this congregation, which I learned my 3rd week here at Kol Ami. My grandfather, Pierre, on May 21st, there he is. He was a travel agent. That's why he's got a globe on his tie. Pierre's World of Travel. Every Jew in Rochester, New York who went on a cruise or traveled to Israel booked with Pierre's World of Travel. My grandfather was born in Berlin in 1933. And on March 21st, 1996, almost exactly 30 years ago, he sat for an interview with an interviewer from the Shoah Foundation, part of Spielberg's project to collect testimonies. In a moment, not yet, Zoe, but in a moment, I want to share with you a clip. The words he's about to say, I shared with you last year or sometime, but I said them, it'll sound better from Grandpa. And what he says right after that is that the reason he was doing this, the reason he sat is because my younger brother and I asked him to. We told him in the way that a 9 and a 7-year-old could, that we wanted the story. And he knew that we were too young. He knew we were too young to hear it. One of the things that he shared in that testimony was that when he was 7, he survived the war in France, like right in the border region, living and pretending to be a Christian. And at one point, as a child, an SS officer came to him and offered him chocolate, speaking to him in German, trying to figure out if maybe this child was not actually a Frenchman and was Jewish, using the child to find the people that SS officer wanted to find, to send them places they did not want to go. It was about the child and about the child's parents. My grandfather happened to have the presence of mind to say, I don't know how to speak German, I don't know what you're saying. Some children didn't have that opportunity. Liam Ramos didn't have that opportunity in Minneapolis this week. A 5-year-old used as bait for parents. And then reading stories upon stories about in America, in the United States of America, where my family came to flee persecution and genocide. Then in America, people are being asked to show their papers, to prove who they are because of what they look like, what they sound like, where it seems they come from. That's happening here, now. And because of the story that I receive, I maintain obligation. That's what our Parsha tells us this week. It tells us words that in just a few weeks we'll repeat around our Passover Seders. V'higadata lavincha, and you shall tell your child on that day. It is because of what God did for me that I am here in this moment and that I share this story. At the Seder we say, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they came out of Egypt. And we tell the story not just to remember our past, but to inform and demand of our present. This is what Grandpa said to me and my brother Aaron.
So if you could tell them just one overriding thing about it all, what would you want to leave them with as a memory of it all?
I want them to be aware of it and to act in such a way that they would do everything they can to prevent anything like this from happening again. And I think that that is a message that that's one thing that they do understand.
To know their history and act in such a way that nothing like this should ever happen again. I know what's happening right now is not the same as the Holocaust. I know it's not the same. But as I think we attribute the quote to Mark Twain. History might not repeat, but it does rhyme. There are stories that we are seeing that seem to betray the values that are part of the promise of this nation. In the rest of the interview, my grandfather talks about falsified papers for him and for his parents. He talks about what it was like to have that fear of having to run from those in positions of authority who wanted harm for him and his family. He also talks about the noble people who stood up to care for them, to support them, to help guide them from this moment to the next. And he talks about the promise of what it meant to come here. Our stories, the stories we tell about where we come from, obligate us. They're not just an obligation to history and memory, though we do maintain that obligation as well. We are obligated to remember our history, and our stories demand of us. They demand of us presence and words and deeds. And this moment feels hard and frightening. And I know that we have partners and friends who we can stand with. I know the work we do here in this community is in service of keeping people safe, giving them the resources that they need. I know that what I hear from my colleagues in Minneapolis is that students are afraid to go to school. Families are afraid to go grocery shopping. Even those who are delivering groceries feel like they're being followed. I don't know what's next. I don't know what we're supposed to do right now or tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. But I do know that our history and our stories obligate us to open our eyes, our mouths, and our hands. Sometime next week, you'll get an email. I'll probably have a link to the sermon. You don't have to watch it. You already watched it. I'll include in there a few links. One will be a link to a statement by I'm going to tell you, I want to get the title right. From the Minnesota Jewish, nope, that's not the right thing. Excuse me, forgive me. That's the title. I didn't have it. I think it's from the Minnesota Rabbinic Association and the Cantors of Minnesota, and their statement about what they're seeing and experiencing, and then this statement, which is the Jewish cross-denominational statement against violent immigration enforcement, that was signed by the leaders of the various institutions of the Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist movements together. Maybe a little Jewish inside baseball. That doesn't happen often. The movements don't come together to say a thing together often. But organized by Rabbi Hera Person, who's the chief executive of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, they did. I'll also share with you a link to Temple Israel of Minneapolis, who has an immigration support fund. Maybe you'll want to direct some dollars there to support them in their work of caring for the people in their communities. We're also working here at building a stronger relationship with El Centro Hispano so we can stand in solidarity with our neighbors who are scared right now. And we'll find the opportunities. We'll find the ways to stand and to speak, to open our eyes, our hearts, our mouths, and our hands to do the sacred work that is our obligation because we are the people who came out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. We're the people who painted blood on our doorposts on a night of fear so that we would remember where we come from. We're the people who eat the bread of poverty, who eat empathy bread, who eat matzah which calls us to remember where we've come from so we don't forget that and so that we build a world worthy of the history we inherit. V'higarata lavincha, and we'll tell our children who we are, where we've come from, and the kind of people and community that we will continue to be. This moment might feel hard or frightening. We might feel unsure of what to do next. And we have the sacred gift of history, of story, and of community to guide us in what we will do going forward. May we find the strength and the courage to join hands and to pray with our feet in the sacred work that comes next. Kain Yehi Ratzon, may these words be worthy of coming true. Shabbat Shalom.